Hey guys, my name is Matsumo, and welcome to your episode of Monday Mailbox. This is a video series where you, the viewer, can submit your gaming-related questions, and then I will give my humble opinion on them. To get the formalities out of the way real quick, if you'd like to submit your own question that can be featured in an upcoming episode, you can do so by leaving a comment down below, or by sending me a Facebook or Twitter message. The first question for today comes from Joshua, and it is, how do you feel about a defensive gadget that would be similar to impact nades, but it would act as a smokescreen, allowing the defense to be more tricky in their flanks? So having smoke on defense would definitely be really interesting. Now, personally, I think that this would suit anchors more than roamers and would be a great secondary gadget. And so instead of bringing barbed wire or deployable shield to try to slow down offense, you would have this as an alternative. Now, what I like about this idea is that as an anchor, one of the things that can be quite difficult is to retake the objective when they've planted it. If offense has every single line of sight locked down, it can feel nearly impossible even to get into the objective room itself. And so if you had the ability to quickly throw down a smoke screen, now offense is going to have to react to that new variable. They're not going to have that perfect line of sight anymore, and so they're going to have to move. They're going to have to adjust, and that adjustment could make for some interesting gameplay moments. This would also just give you a lot more flexibility. If you're stuck in a corner and there's not a lot that you can do to get out of it, having a smoke screen to be able to run out, which normally would have been out in the open, give you the opportunity to move from one side over to the other, could be incredibly advantageous. And so that would be another great aspect about having this kind of a secondary gadget at your fingertips. Now, hopefully you can sort of see some of the flaws with this concept though, and that is the fact that it might be too strong in some situations. If they have planted the diffuser, defense now could just throw down a bunch of smoke screens, have one of their teammates go for the diffuse, and then if offense tries to rush on in because they can't see what's going on anymore, you have another one just standing right there waiting to take them out. That could be very frustrating. You want to give defense utility, and I think that there could be some interesting gameplay elements here, but it might be too much utility, at least in some circumstances. This would also just be a gigantic buff to Warden. Now, I don't think that he should get this secondary gadget himself, but even if you just have a modern amount of teamwork and communication, someone places down the smokescreen for him, and then he has free reign at anyone that's trying to contest you now, trying to go after the diffuser. That also doesn't sound like the most enjoyable experience. And so honestly, what I would much rather see them do is, at least for a first attempt, instead of giving this as a secondary gadget, make it a small upgrade to smoke. He already has this as a primary, so he would be the only one really affected by it, but just make his gadget less transparent. A lot of times it just feels like it's a flip of the coin if you're going to be able to see the person on the other end. Either you see them clear as day, or they're able to take you out no problem. And so just make it act as a normal smoke screen. Granted, it might still be a bit too powerful, but at least it doesn't have as many advantages as just simply giving this as a secondary gadget. And so all in all, while I really do like this idea, I think that if it was done properly, it could add in some really cool new elements that we don't really get experience on defense. Hopefully you can understand why I'm a bit hesitant, at least for a couple of these reasons. The next question is, what do you think about an Overwatch style feature where players who are high ranked can review report cheater footage, and if enough reviewers deem that they were cheating, they will then get banned? This is a feature in CSGO, which is where I got the idea. So this is something a lot of people have been recommending. If you're not aware of the way that the Overwatch system works in CSGO, it's to my understanding, they essentially got the player base involved to finding and stopping people who are cheating. The way it works is that if enough people report someone for doing something suspicious, it will then put them into the Overwatch queue. You can then watch that player's perspective to see if they're using a third-party software. If they're snapping to someone's head, or if they're tracking people through walls, or if they have no recoil, it's going to be very obvious, and then you can report them specifically for those actions. If enough people in the Overwatch who are reviewing this footage identify like, yeah, this guy is probably doing something he shouldn't, it will then get sent off to the developers to take the necessary actions. The thing is though, and the reason why I never expected this to happen in Rainbow Six Siege, is that we've never had a spectator or a replay system. That's kind of important, where you need to go back and watch these previous matches. The infrastructure just simply wasn't there. And so while it's awesome in theory, I think it was very successful in CSGO. I think a lot of people, I think the community in general really like having that in place. I just never thought that it would be something that Rainbow Six Siege would ever have. But now that we are getting a spectator mode, this is something that they announced at the Year 5, Year 6 panel. This also could become a possibility. I think what I like about this system, even though I know there are cynical people out there that will say that this is just the developers being lazy. You're essentially getting your community to do the work that you should be doing. You shouldn't have your player base having to monitor to see if people are cheating. You should be the ones that are identifying and having your anti-cheat do all of that work. And I do understand that argument, but at the same time, I know a lot of people really like this kind of a system because not only does it allow them to feel like they're giving back to the community, they feel like they're cleaning up this toxicity, but on top of that, they're able to get back at these cheaters who are causing these very issues. All in all, though, I am definitely not opposed to Ubisoft adding something like this into Siege. Granted, it probably will take a long time because they don't even have the spectator mode in just yet, but especially considering that a few developers have stated that they would like the game to eventually go free to play, if they do decide to go that route, this might be a great tool to try to stop the influx of cheating that eventually would be inevitable. The next question comes from Chance, and it is, would you rather see more simplistic maps like House or more complicated maps like Theme Park? Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by simplistic. I don't think that having a basic layout is necessarily a bad thing. The most recent Stadium update, I think, is a prime example. I really enjoyed Stadium. I thought it was a ton of fun, and by and large, it really wasn't all that complex. Now, granted, this may be because we already knew the layout. It's essentially Oregon 2.0 with a couple of adjustments here and there, but by and large, it was a very condensed map. And so I don't think that having something that is simple is necessarily a bad thing. On top of that, one of the things I loved about Stadium was that there was hardly any clutter whatsoever. Ubisoft likes to add in a lot of detail onto their maps, which I think adds the atmosphere. It makes them feel more lived in and alive. But one of the downsides of that is that when you have pots and pans and all these just kind of cluttered junk everywhere, it can distract you and make it difficult to be able to identify if that is a player in the corner. And so what I loved about Stadium in particular, with that more simplistic design, was that everything was nice and clean. There wasn't anything kind of to distract your eye. You knew what you were getting yourself into every single time that you round the corner. And so that's something that I wish that Ubisoft would try to do more, especially if they're going to be reworking existing maps. And I'm not saying that they should just make them completely devoid of character, but hopefully kind of understand where I'm going with this. From the sounds of it, though, this is more of a question of, do I like small maps or large maps? And honestly, it's got to be somewhere in the middle and leaning more towards large. The reason why we don't have any maps being made that are the size of House anymore is because it just isn't big enough. You need to have the area on defense to be able to roam around and flank offense, and there just isn't that because of the very limited size that that map provides. Now, that doesn't mean that larger is always necessarily better in this context, because I think Tower is a prime example of where they went to the extreme. There are so many nooks and crannies and places for defenders to hide on. It's a roamer's paradise. You never feel like you can get a foothold on offense, and that sense of dread and anxiety just kind of permeates throughout that map. Like, I do not like Tower for that very reason. And so long story short, there needs to be a middle ground. There isn't anything necessarily wrong with simplicity, but there needs to be enough complexity to allow for the gameplay that we know and love in Siege. The next question comes from Jeffrey, and it is, what is your take on the new nade buff coming to Rainbow Six? So you are right, nades are getting changed with this upcoming patch, but it's not a buff like a lot of people are kind of expecting. They're not increasing their damage, they're not increasing their area effect, or at least I don't believe so. Essentially what they're doing is that now soft walls and barricades and stuff to that nature are not going to absorb all of the damage and just block the damage outright. Currently, if one of these gadgets goes off in the room adjacent to you and there is a soft wall in between you and it, you don't take any damage. That's just the the way that the nade system works, but that is now going to be changing. There's going to be holes in the wall that get made by this nade, and that's going to indicate to you that that's where that damage came from. I honestly didn't really notice a whole lot on the technical test servers. Like, yeah, nades have always been really good, but I don't think this is really going to be all that big of a game changer. I think the best comparison to this is when Fuse got a buff many years ago. A lot of people, when that update came out, thought that he was going to be overpowered, but then after a couple of days, people were able to learn what to look out for. They adapted, and now Fuse is honestly probably one of the weaker operators in Siege because of that. People are going to be able to learn and adapt to the way that this new mechanic works, and so I don't think it's gonna matter all that much. But yeah, guys, that has been it for today's episode of Monday Mailbox. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you thought about what we discussed in today's video. Do you like the idea of defense having access to some sort of smoke nade gadget? Do you think that that's not necessary? Let me know your guys' thoughts down below. As always, if you'd like to submit your own question for an upcoming episode, you can also leave a comment or by sending me a Facebook or Twitter message. But until next time, guys, have a good one and take it easy.